Survive in any way you can think of. The rule present in almost every CTM map that serves to define the genre, indicating that you can break, place, and craft whatever you need to conquer the perilous dungeons laid out before you. And perilous they are, as well as unique, beautiful, and full of opportunity. Completing the monument is one thing, but what if you don't just want to survive in any way you can think of? You want to live. If one of these areas popped up in the real world, humanity wouldn't be satisfied with just looking from afar and taking a walk around. We have and still are exploring every corner of our existence after all, from the deepest oceans to outer space. We'd want to truly experience it, conquer it, and eventually make it ours. The Ragecraft series by Heliceo is well known to most Complete the Monument players, and for good reason. It's one of the greatest and most influential series in the history of the genre. And with 4 maps, The Corrupted Path, Insomnia, The Prophecy, and Underworld, it has a huge variety of terrifying and memorable environments. In this scenario, I've taken all 66 areas from the series and asked, if someone with an appropriate amount of survival knowledge, skills, and experience were dropped into the area, how would they fare? Would they be able to carve out a new life for themselves, or would their new home simply be too dangerous to bear? This is evaluating every area in Ragecraft by real-world survivability. Now, before we begin, let's set some ground rules. First off, for clarification, this is real-life survival, not Minecraft survival. We can assume that the laws of physics can bend a little bit to make otherwise impossible areas able to exist, that the survivalist is knowledgeable and skilled enough to make do as long as the environment allows for it, and that they won't suffer from the ill psychological effects of being cut off from the rest of the world. They also cannot escape the map or travel to any other areas. They're stuck with whichever area they're dropped in for better or for worse. As far as the areas themselves go, we are including any named areas regardless of whether they contain objectives, but I am going to exclude Nexi? I'm going to exclude home base areas, as they're often intentionally designed to be habitable in the long term, and thus go against the spirit of our little thought exercise. Also excluded are intersections, as well as Ragecraft 4's 2 towns and 3 boss-only areas. Everything else is fair game. Additionally, so that the survivor doesn't get instantly murked in every area, hostile mobs will not be present, except in these 8 areas where, due to their names, I've determined the presence of a specific type of mob is crucial to the area's identity. And that's it. Those are the only rules. Do note that I am not a survival expert by any means, so much of this is going to be inaccurate. I'm simply doing this for fun for the purpose of entertainment. I'll be taking some creative liberties where necessary. So before you smack me upside the head with your actually comments, please keep that in mind. Also, this should be obvious, but I'm going through every area in all 4 Ragecraft maps during this video, so spoiler warning. Yeah. With that, let's start at the bottom. I call this first tier out of the 4 the near instant death tier. If our survivalist was dropped in any of these areas, it's pretty much guaranteed that they would be dead within hours, minutes, or in some cases even seconds. There's a concept when it comes to survival called the rule of 3s. It states that a human being can live for 3 minutes without air, 3 hours without shelter, 3 days without water, or 3 weeks without food. We can get rid of this first one because fortunately none of Ragecraft's areas are lacking breathable air, but this one about shelter raises an interesting question. What would the climates of these areas be like? We don't have to worry about it in Minecraft, but we certainly would in the real world. If an area is especially cold, then a survivalist could theoretically build a fire and shelter to keep themselves warm. But extreme heat is a different matter altogether. Some of these areas are enclosed caves with an abundance of boiling hot magma. These kinds of caves don't exist in real life, but without proper circulation, the ambient temperature inside would get high. Astoundingly so. In the real world, the closest equivalents are probably magma chambers underneath volcanoes, which aren't even possible to drill into, let alone survive in for any amount of time due to the extreme temperature and pressure. To be more specific, they can get to over 800 degrees Celsius, or if you use Fahrenheit, really fucking hot, and that's a pretty conservative estimate. It can be even hotter depending on the type of magma. At even a quarter of that temperature, we can instantly put into this tier Merciless Mines, Brimstone River, The Invasion, Mount Sinus, Fort Viserion, and Watcher's Realm, as all of them both contain heavy amounts of lava and are entirely underground, so you would likely be gone before even realizing what was happening. I'm being a little generous by not putting the areas along Ragecraft 4's giant lava river here, but I'm gonna throw a Dreadfire stronghold in there anyway, as I think having your home suspended directly above the most lava-y part of said river crosses a line. Otherwise, nothing in the rule of 3s is relevant for this tier, but that doesn't mean there can't be other immediate threats. There are 6 areas in which you would paint the walls the minute you first come across a hostile mob. Ninja Academy, Reptilian Stronghold, Phantom Ruins, Summoner's Lair, Illager's Keep, and Cannibal Slaughterhouse. These mobs aren't just mindless creatures, by the way. From our world's perspective, they are highly intelligent and dangerous. Using the reptiles as an example, they are advanced enough to have created weapons, infrastructure, and an army with a chain of command. So you'd pretty much be screwed even if you were an armed, experienced fighter. And what do you know, these are all areas that were exempted from the no hostile mobs rule. How about that? The only ones exempted that I didn't just name are Rage of the Reptiles and Arachnophobia, both of which I'll get to later. There are two more areas I'm putting into this tier. First is the Slaughterhouse from Ragecraft 1. That's right, the absence of the word cannibal at the beginning of the title isn't enough to save this one. With harmful potions falling from the ceiling and a thin, spotty floor over void, the terrain is harsh enough that I'm going to include this one as well. And even if you survive that, there's a room further up that heavily implies that whoever runs the Slaughterhouse kills and eats humans, so you have that going for you as well. At least you'll be delicious when you die. The final area going into this tier is Crumbling Abyss from Ragecraft 2. It's got an extremely cold climate with little to no natural resources and void holes, which is already pretty bad, but the real kicker is that there's no light. None in the entire area. So if you get taken here, you'll immediately be plunged into pitch darkness and assaulted by sheer cold. If you stay put, you'll freeze to death, and if you try to move around, it'll only take a few minutes for you to stumble into a void hole and fall to your death. In conclusion, not only will you die, it will be terrifying the entire time you're dying. Our next tier up is called Wouldn't Last a Week. These are the areas where you wouldn't immediately be offed, but you still wouldn't last long, usually due to a lack of some critical resource. This is also easily the most populated tier out of the 4. Out of the 66 areas evaluated, 26 of them, or about 39%, are in this tier, and over half of those are placed here due to violating the next clause in our trusty rule of threes, a lack of drinkable water. Brimstone Isle, Imperial Halls, Scattered Fortress, Sanguine Temple, Unholy Arena, The Outpost, Cinderblood Temple, The Exile, Obsidian Throne, The Abyss, Voidstorm Citadel, and Ruptured Realm all fall under this category. I also specify drinkable water because there are 2 areas that do contain undrinkable water. Brimstone Labs from Ragecraft 2 has the occasional water pipes, but they're most likely either highly polluted or not actually water, but rather cryptic and curious concoctions of chemicals, since this is a chemical lab after all. And if you read the syllabus, you'll know you shouldn't be drinking that stuff. The other is Ragecraft 3's Reeking River, which is, explicitly poisonous to even touch, let alone drink. That makes 14 areas that weren't already put into near instant death tier that don't have drinkable water. In fact, most of these areas don't have any food either. The only exceptions are the Outpost, which has giant mushrooms, Cinderblood Temple, which has a few pigs over here, Reeking River, which takes place in a jungle, so food shouldn't be too hard to come by, the Abyss, whose local delicacies have some truly explosive flavor, and Sanguine Temple, whose only food source is a few random cookies scattered throughout, so, hey, I guess you'll die happy at least. Which brings me to the final rule of threes and the other major subcategory for this tier, a lack of food. Now, this is where things get a little bit more subjective. There's a lot more types of food in real life than in Minecraft, and therefore many more ways to obtain it, so some concessions have been made. Even if an area doesn't have any Minecraft food, I may still consider it to have real life food. For example, the aforementioned Reeking River is a jungle, so there's a good chance you'd be able to scrounge something together. With that in mind, by my determination, there are 9 yet unranked areas in Ragecraft that do have drinkable water, but don't have any kind of reliable real life food source. Infested Roots, Screaming Waters, The Battlefield, Frozen Path, The Last Sanctuary, Jin's Legacy, The Rock, Crystal Quarry, and Frigid Palace. So if you do end up in one of these places, I guess just try eating your arm or something, I don't know. We're through with the rule of threes at this point, but there are still 3 areas that do have food and water, but I'm still putting in this tier. The first is Trinity Caves from Ragecraft 2. This area is pretty unique in that it has a manageable amount of lava, but a large abundance of fire. And because it's in an enclosed space, you know what that means: air pollution and smoke inhalation that gradually shuts your body down little by little until you can't take it anymore and just lose consciousness for good. Scary. The second is Mushroom Mania, also from Ragecraft 2. At first glance, this area looks like paradise. Great climate, well lit, a lot of water, good food options, including mushroom cows, and pre-existing shelter. So, what's the issue here? Well, reading the signs at the beginning of the area reveals that the mushroom's spores are known to cause horrifying hallucinations and can even trap your spirit forever in a lethal and terrifying interdimensional hellscape. Yikes. So, you'd be fine at first, but the moment you inhale too much of these spores, your ass is going straight to the Australian outback where you're getting jumped on another level by things you've only ever seen in a kindergartner's crayon scribbles. The final area in this tier is Winter's End from Ragecraft 3. I mentioned earlier that building fire and shelter would usually protect you from the cold well enough to make do, but this area in particular is described in its lore as being so cold that, quote, only a few well-adapted creatures can survive. In this context, humans are decidedly not well-adapted creatures, so I'd say this area is an exception to that rule. With that, we've made it through all the areas in which our hypothetical survivalist wouldn't be able to keep themselves alive in the long term. But just because staying alive is possible from here on out doesn't mean it's going to be pleasant. That's why I call this next tier miserable but alive. You can survive, but you are really gonna have to fight for it. Every day will be a struggle to keep yourself going, but it can be done. There are 9 areas in this tier, and since their reasonings for being here are generally pretty subjective, I'll be going through each one individually. Let's start at the beginning. Rage of the Reptiles, the very first area of the entire series. This is the only area exempted from the no hostile mobs rule that isn't in near instant death tier, as the reptiles in question are only present in certain parts of the area. As long as you stay away from those areas, you'll be okay, but any run-in with them could prove deadly, so you'd likely be living in constant paranoia. Thus, miserable but alive seems appropriate. Next up, Gruesome Zoo. Initially, I actually thought this area would rank near the top of the survivability index. On paper, the idea of a bunch of interconnected, diverse biodomes sounds like it would carry an abundance of resources of all different varieties. Due to the nature of the area, it would probably have good temperature control too, and thus have manageable temperatures despite copious amounts of lava. In actuality though, all of the individual environments within these domes are pretty harsh, and the only water in the entire area is this small pool right here. Not great. The very next area, Twisted Terror, also goes here. You can get by, but there aren't really reliable food options besides melons, and pretty much all the terrain is treacherous and rocky with only a little bit of pre-existing shelter. Our oblivious survivalist may also fall for the age-old trap of jumping into the water from above only to realize it's 1 meter deep and plummet into the void. If you're wondering how such a phenomenon could exist in the real world, the answer is shut up, don't think about it. Moving on to Ragecraft 2, the Descent is pretty friendly and lush, but is the smallest area in the entire series, and like Gruesome Zoo, has very little water. Hope you're not claustrophobic. Death Row is a prison. In other words, an area that is specifically designed to keep its inhabitants miserable but alive. It's the poster child for this tier, no further explanation needed. The Hunting Grounds. Food and water are plentiful, but the climate is cold and there are angry wolves everywhere, which still exist in this scenario as wolves are technically considered neutral mobs, not hostile. If you don't like that, then get over it. It's my video and I make the rules. Ragecraft 3 only has 1 area in this tier, Heliceo Labs, the brown wool area. The building is presumably climate controlled, there's plenty of space and food and resources are plentiful, but the space is very ruined and thus hard to traverse. All the water is on the top floor, only accessible by climbing an empty elevator shaft, and last but not least, all of your neighbors are dangerous biological experiments that won't hesitate to make origami with your femur instead of just reporting you to the HOA when they have grievances. Prismarine Empire from Ragecraft 4 has plenty of water with a lively marine ecosystem, but the terrain is mostly structural and disconnected, and besides fishing, food is unreliable. And finally, Simulacrum. Everything here is so alien that pre-existing survival knowledge wouldn't get you as far here as with other areas. It's also completely psychotic, and its illusions and mind games would likely gaslight your nuts off, but it's probably still doable. The water is purple but safe, and there's probably food? I don't know, but as long as you're semi-lucky and don't get yourself killed by overdosing on weird berries, you can probably make it work. That's it for Miserable but Alive. Our last and best tier is Reasonably Survivable, which pretty much just contains any areas that don't have significant enough issues to warrant placing them lower on the scale. If our survivalist was dropped in one of these areas, not only would they be able to achieve long-term survival, they could probably do so without too much trouble and in a relatively stable way. There are 11 areas in this tier. Like with Miserable but Alive, I'll go through all of them, but most don't have much to say about them. First off, Merciless Mines from Ragecraft 1. Now, if you were paying close attention, you may remember I already put this one in near instant death tier due to, well, this. But this area is kind of a special case in that it's the only area in the entire series I'm giving 2 different rankings. That's because it has 2 dungeon areas for the magenta and light blue wolves respectively, and they are vastly different from one another. The issue with this is that neither of these sub-areas have their own names, so according to our established rules, they're both considered the same area. If you're getting dropped in the Merciless Mines, you'd better hope you end up in the Lush Island Castle rather than the affront to God. Venom Grove has good climate, food, water, and resources, plus the added bonus of a dog, so that way you won't get too lonely. Heliceo Technologies is a sub-area of the Wouldn't Last a Week tier Frozen Path, but due to being indoors, it's likely climate-controlled, and it seems to be built to allow researchers to live inside. Let's just hope you don't get cabin fever, as if you end up here, you will be indoors for the rest of your life. Sunken Colony pisses me off. I really wanted to put this in near instant death tier for violating our 3 minutes without air clause, but there is a dryland portion at the beginning of the area that, while relatively small and uninteresting, would have everything you need to survive. I'm putting it in this tier, but I'm not happy about it. Valley of Blood is a nice little village that is generally pretty ideal, with the one small caveat of having near comical amounts of blood and guts strewn about everywhere. The smell would be awful, but otherwise you'd be fine. Just ignore the giant deadly spider cave next door. The breeding grounds is a bit dark and damp and has little pre-built shelter, but is otherwise fine. And hey, the water even regenerates wounds and grants strength, so you can definitely use that to your advantage. Cheater. Little Mines is lush with plentiful resources, but it's kinda dreary and all of its houses are made out of mushrooms. I know you wouldn't have to worry about following OSHA regulations here, but I'm pretty sure this isn't structurally stable. The Last Sorcerer has a nice sized tower to live in, but that's about all it has going for it. Resources are a bit inconvenient to get your hands on, and the elemental side caverns are very hostile, so you wouldn't have much to do besides hang out in the tower. The Descent in... wait a minute. Okay, no, there are apparently two different areas, both named The Descent for some reason. The one in Ragecraft 2 we already went over, this is the one in Ragecraft 4. The Descent has open sky, lots of space, and its water heals you. Resources are a little on the scarce side compared to other areas in this tier, but it should still be workable. Empyrean Gardens has lots of water and greenery, but food is surprisingly not that common since the gardens appear man-made and the trees in the more natural-looking outskirts of the area are dead. Plus, Empyrean is f***ing spelled wrong. But with some careful management, you'll be fine. And finally, House of Horror. The castle itself will really mess you up if you go inside. It includes areas such as the Lightless Halls, which are explicitly stated by the title Lightless Halls to be lightless, which combined with the Void Holes can be pretty deadly, as established by Crumbling Abyss. But the outside of the castle is actually quite pleasant, so into this tier it goes. Celebrating Halloween year-round may get old though, and there's no candy. That makes 11, but if you've been keeping track, I've only gone over 60 out of 66 total areas so far. That's because I've left the 3 most and 3 least survivable areas for the end, and I'll be going over them in detail one by one. The 3 best areas are the ones where not only could you live in a pretty stable manner, after getting established it could even be called pleasant. In fact, I originally devised a tier higher than reasonably survivable called basically a vacation spot, but these 3 areas ended up being the only 3 areas I put in it, so I scrapped it. For the 3 worst areas, it would have been very easy for me to just grab 3 of the volcanic temperature areas and call it a day, like Mount Sinus, where the area contains an active volcano and is so hot in lore that you need a special set of equipment just to reach the end without going blind. But that's boring, and I'm trying to make good content here. So for the bottom 3, I've instead elected to choose areas that have environmental hazards that are, let's just say, uniquely hazardous. With that, the 3rd least survivable area in all of Ragecraft, it's Living Nightmares, the Greenwool area of Ragecraft 2. This area's gimmick in the lore is that it manifests in a form that preys on your deepest innermost fears. It goes without saying that this would be bad, and even if you were able to choose which of its existing sub-areas you wanted to be dropped in, your choices are, let's see here, an area with decent resources but with deadly and aggressive venomous spiders around every corner, an area consisting of just a thin glass floor over an endless pit, and an area in complete darkness with void holes and no natural resources whatsoever. Yeah, not great. Out of every Ragecraft area, this is probably the one I'd least like to end up in myself. And keep in mind, this is only the 3rd worst. On the other end of the spectrum, our 3rd most survivable area is Boombog Bastion, the light blue wool area of Ragecraft 4. While bogs aren't especially pleasant, the bog itself only makes up half the area. The other half is a jungle, and with both halves together, this area has a ton of space with easily traversable terrain, and you'd have plenty of food, water, and other resources, plus a giant castle that only needs a little bit of cleanup to be fully functional. Overall, a very solid pick. On to our 2nd least survivable area. Remember near the beginning of the video when I went over the rule of 3s and said there aren't any areas without breathable air? Yeah, I lied. There's one, Reeking Ravine, the short transition area immediately after Ragecraft 4's Nexus. One look at this area tells you this place isn't safe to be in. The terrain sucks, and the rain inflicts poison on contact, but, most notably given the nature of the area, the spores visibly floating through the air would almost certainly be toxic and thus unbreathable. So you wouldn't last a minute here. Or actually you would last 1 minute, just not 3. Our 2nd most survivable area is a pretty significant jump up from our 3rd. It's Little Empire, the orange-magenta area of Ragecraft 2. And what an area it is. Great climate, plenty of water, lots of food options including livestock and a giant wheat farm, and dozens of fully furnished, well-maintained buildings including a castle. There's even good recreation opportunities. The refreshing waterfall lake at the bottom is big enough to swim in, and there's even this nice hiking trail that goes up to a beautiful overlook of the area. This place is basically a small idyllic town cut off from the rest of the world. Invite your friends and you can all start a new life here together, it'll be great. And keep in mind, this is only number 2. Number 1 is even better, but before that, our number 1 least survivable area in all of Ragecraft, the one that would end your existence in the most brutal and efficient way possible, It's the Great Thunder, the second to last area of Ragecraft 1. Where do I even begin with this one? First off, it's a volcanic cave, so extreme temperatures are given. The whole area is made of bedrock, so there's no resources of any kind, let alone food and water. And last but certainly not least, there are lit explosives constantly falling from the sky. Needless to say, these aren't ideal conditions for survival. You can melt down to your bones, dehydrate, starve, be blown to bits, go deaf from the constant explosions, take your pick. It's completely uninhabitable not only to humans but to pretty much all life. This area is simply a formality. If you end up here, you're already dead and gone, no matter how skilled or resilient you may be. But it's not all bad, we still have our winner, the #1 most survivable area in the whole series, the one where you'd not only be able to survive but thrive, is Zephyrin Sands, the orange-magenta area of Ragecraft 3. I mean, just look at this place. Gorgeous desert oasis environment? Check. Tons of resources, food, water, and fertile land? Check. Well-furnished and maintained buildings, including a castle? Check. Overall, it's honestly pretty similar to Little Empire, but with one more major advantage, and that's the fact that it's open sky. So in addition to everything else, you'd get fresh air, sunlight, and you'd be able to see the stars at night. Unironically, this is probably the only area in the whole series that I would actually willingly take a vacation to if I had the opportunity. If you end up here, congratulations, you've won the Ragecraft Survivability Lottery. And that's that. Now that I've gone through the whole list, I'll leave you with some fun facts about my findings because I spent a long time looking through these areas. Out of 66 areas, 23 are survivable in the long term, so that's just over a third. Each of the 4 maps has 6 survivable areas except for Ragecraft 2, which has 5, and 3 out of those 5 are in Miserable But Alive, making it the most dangerous map out of the 4. There are just 2 wool colors in which all 4 areas of that wool color are in the same tier. All 4 grey areas are in near instant death, and all 4 black areas are in wouldn't last a week. Likewise, there are 2 other wool colors, light blue and yellow, in which all 4 areas are in different tiers. Finally, here are the total numbers of areas for each map tier combination. The highest is Ragecraft 1 having 8 wouldn't last weeks, and the lowest is Ragecraft 3 with only 1 Miserable But Alive. Also, the longest streak of any one tier goes to the final 4 areas of Ragecraft 4, which are all wouldn't last a week tier. If you've made it this far, thanks for watching. Let me know down below any feedback you have on the video, positive or negative, and maybe give it a like if you're so inclined. I'll see you all next time with my next psychotic idea, whatever it may be.